I never imagined I would be standing squeezed in a sweat-filled subway car while owning a $90,000 vehicle sitting safely at my sister-in-law's house. But when my eyes met my dad's steady gaze amidst that chaotic crowd, I knew my silent endurance had finally reached its end. He did not ask questions or scold me. He simply looked at my exhaustion and said exactly 2 words that changed the entire course of my life right then. My name is Harper, and at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, I felt less like a human being and more like a pack mule on the verge of collapse. The air conditioning on the subway car had failed 3 stops back, turning the crowded metal tube into a rolling sauna that smelled of stale sweat and wet wool. My fingers were turning purple, wrapped tightly around the plastic handles of 2 bulging grocery bags that dug into my flesh like wire, while the strap of a heavy diaper bag sawed into my shoulder. Beside me, my daughter Mia clung to my leg. Her small face flushed pink from the stifling heat. She was only 4 years old, and the crush of bodies was overwhelming for her. She let out a low, miserable whimper, burying her face in my jeans. "Mommy, my legs hurt," she whined, her voice thin and watery. "I want to sit down. Please." "I know, baby, I know," I whispered, shifting my weight to create a tiny pocket of space for her against the metal pole. "Just 2 more stops. Be brave for Mommy." Okay. Guilt washed over me, hot and suffocating. This was not how it was supposed to be. My mind flashed back to the smell of fresh leather and the perfect, climate-controlled silence of the $90,000 SUV sitting in a driveway in the suburbs. My father, Thomas, a man who had built a successful HVAC empire with his bare hands, had bought that car for me on my 30th birthday. He had handed me the keys with a stern look, telling me he wanted his granddaughter surrounded by the best steel and airbags money could buy. Yet here I was, sweating through my blouse, jostled by strangers, while my husband's sister, Brenda, was likely driving my car to a spa appointment, claiming she needed it to maintain the image of her non-existent event planning company. I felt pathetic. I was a grown woman who had allowed Gavin and his sisters to strip me of my dignity because I was too afraid to be called selfish. Disaster struck as the train lurched violently around a curve. The bottom of my left grocery bag, weakened by condensation from a milk jug, finally gave up. It tore open with a wet, ripping sound. 5 green apples tumbled out, bouncing loudly on the grime-streaked floor of the subway car. I gasped, instinctively dropping to my knees to retrieve them, nearly knocking Mia over. "Hey, watch it," a man in a business suit snapped, recoiling as if I were a disease. "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry," I stammered, scrambling on the dirty floor. I reached for an apple that had rolled near a pair of muddy boots, my face burning. I could feel the eyes of the other passengers boring into me. They saw a frazzled, messy mother who could not hold it together. They judged me, and I judged myself even harder. I hated Gavin for putting me here. I hated Kelly and Brenda for their entitlement, but mostly, I hated myself for letting it happen. I grabbed the last apple, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline, and started to stand up. That was when the atmosphere in the car shifted. The wall of commuters, usually impenetrable and rude, suddenly parted. It was unnatural, like water flowing around a boulder. Standing there, gripping the overhead rail, was a man in dusty work clothes. His heavy boots were coated in white drywall dust, and his flannel shirt was stained with grease. But he stood with a posture that commanded absolute respect. It was my father. Time seemed to freeze. Dad stared at me, his blue eyes widening as they took in the scene. He saw the sweat dripping down my forehead. He saw the broken bag. He saw Mia clinging to my leg, looking exhausted. And he saw me, his daughter, looking small and defeated in the middle of the chaos. I froze, paralyzed by a shame so deep it made me nauseous. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I did not want him to see me like this. He did not say a word. He did not ask where the car was. He pushed past the businessman who had yelled at me, his presence so imposing that the man actually shrank back. Dad reached down and scooped Mia up into his massive left arm. She immediately laid her head on his dusty shoulder, closing her eyes. Then, he reached out with his free hand and took the torn grocery bag and the other heavy sack from my trembling fingers. He looked at me, his jaw set hard, his eyes scanning my face with an intensity that made me want to cry. "Let's go," he said. His voice was low, rough, and left absolutely no room for argument. The doors opened, and I followed him out, leaving the spilled apples behind. The cabin of my father's Ford F-250 smelled like old coffee, sawdust, and the specific brand of peppermint gum he had chewed since I was a child. It was a scent that bypassed my brain and went straight to my heart, signaling safety. Outside, the city was loud and chaotic, but inside that truck, the world felt solid and manageable. Dad opened the rear door and lifted Mia into her car seat. His large, rough hands, usually so powerful they could bend pipes, moved with incredible gentleness as he clicked the buckles into place. He reached into the small cooler he kept between the front seats and pulled out a chilled box of apple juice. He always kept them there, just in case. "Here you go, pumpkin," he said softly. Mia took it with both hands, her eyes already drooping. She took a sip and let out a long sigh, sinking back into the seat. She was safe. Dad climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing us in. The silence that followed was heavy. He did not put the key in the ignition. Instead, he rested his hands on the steering wheel and turned his head slowly to look at me. The streetlights outside cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the deep lines etched around his eyes. He did not look angry. He looked devastated. "Harper," he said, his voice quiet. "Where is the car I gave you?" My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. It's in the shop." I lied, though my voice trembled. "Just routine maintenance. It needed an oil change and a tire rotation." I risked a glance at him. Dad had been navigating the cutthroat construction industry for 40 years. He could spot a dishonest subcontractor from a mile away, and he certainly knew when his own daughter was lying to him. He didn't blink. He just waited. The dam broke. The shame I had been swallowing for weeks came rushing up, burning my throat. "Gavin made me give it to them," I whispered, the tears spilling over before I could stop them. He said Brenda and Kelly needed it for their image, for Elite Visions. They have a big client, and they said showing up in their old cars would ruin the deal. I wiped my face aggressively, hating how weak I sounded. "It has been a month, Dad. A whole month." I continued, my words tumbling out faster now. Every time I ask for it back, they gang up on me. Gavin tells me I'm being unreasonable. Brenda says I'm selfish. They told me that if I cared about the family's future, I would sacrifice a little convenience. They made me feel like I was the villain for wanting my own car back to drive my daughter to preschool. Dad turned back to the windshield. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles had turned bone white. The sorrow in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory focus I had rarely seen directed at anyone other than people who tried to cheat him out of money. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number without looking and put it to his ear. "Vinny," he said. The tone was clipped and icy. "It's Thomas. I need you to pull a full financial background check on Gavin and his two sisters. Personal accounts, business filings, credit card debt, everything. I want to know exactly how much money they don't have." He listened for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "I don't care what time it is," Dad said. "Do it now. I'll pay the overtime." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the dashboard. Then, he finally started the engine. The truck roared to life, a powerful guttural sound that vibrated through the floorboards. You and Mia are coming home with me tonight," he stated, shifting the gear stick with a definitive clunk. "Mom is making a roast. You are going to eat, and you are going to sleep in a bed where nobody calls you selfish." I nodded, unable to speak. "But first," he added, pulling out into traffic with decisive aggression, "we are going to stop at your house. You need to pack your bags." As the familiar streets of my neighborhood rolled by outside the passenger window, my mind drifted back to a dinner party 4 weeks ago. It was the night the trap had snapped shut, though I had been too blind to see the teeth hidden in the grass. I remembered sitting at the dining table in my in-laws' house. To the untrained eye, the house was a palace of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but I knew the truth. The marble was high-end vinyl tile, the chandelier was purchased on a predatory credit plan, and every piece of furniture in the living room was rented. It was a house built on debt and delusion, designed to project an image of wealth that none of them actually possessed. Brenda, my sister-in-law, had started the performance over the appetizer. She sighed loudly, picking at her salad with a manicured hand. "I just don't know what to do," she said, her voice trembling with theatrical stress. "Elite Visions has a potential client flying in from Dubai. This is the contract that puts us on the map. But if I pick him up in my beat-up Honda, the deal is dead before it starts. Perception is reality in this business." The table fell silent. I focused on my food, sensing the crosshairs turning toward me. Well, Kelly, the middle sister, chimed in, leaning forward with a shark-like grin. "It is a shame we don't have access to a luxury vehicle. Oh, wait, Harper has that massive SUV just sitting in her driveway. It is practically brand new." I had frozen, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "I use that car every day for Mia," I said weakly. "But you don't need a luxury car to go to the grocery store." "Harper," Kelly countered, her tone dripping with condescension. "Brenda is building an empire. It would be so selfish not to help family. Honestly, it is a bit arrogant to keep it all to yourself when Brenda's future is at stake." I looked at Gavin, waiting for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that the car was a gift from my father and that it was not community property. Instead, I felt his hand slide onto my knee under the table. He squeezed. It was not a comforting touch. His fingers dug into my flesh hard enough to bruise. "Don't embarrass me," he whispered, leaning close to my ear so only I could hear. "Just let her use it. Don't be difficult." The final blow came from Gavin's mother. She took a sip of her wine and looked at me with a pitying smile. "You have to understand. Girls," she said smoothly to her daughters. "Harper comes from a different background. Her people are manual laborers. They clutch their possessions because they are afraid to lose them. She simply does not understand the culture of sharing that we have in the upper class." The memory made my stomach churn. They had twisted my reality until I felt like the villain for wanting to keep my own property. They had gaslit me into handing over the keys just to prove I was not low class. A vibration in my pocket snapped me back to the present. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Gavin. "Are you home yet? Brenda needs the spare key she lost to the main one. Hurry up." A chill ran down my spine. Lost the key. That was a smart key fob worth $500. I stared at the screen, my hands starting to shake. I held the phone up so Dad could see it. He glanced at the message, his eyes flicking back to the road. He did not yell. He did not slam the steering wheel. He just let out a short, sharp scoff. It was a sound of pure disgust. "I never liked him. Harper," Dad said, his voice level and cold. "I saw through him the day you brought him home. A man who spends more time talking about his potential than working on his reality. But I kept my mouth shut because I wanted you to be happy. I respected your choice." He paused, signaling to turn onto my street. "But that respect ended the moment he let his family treat you like a servant." He finished. "The limit has been crossed." The truck turned the corner, and my house came into view. It was a nice colonial that Dad had helped us with the down payment for, though Gavin told everyone he had bought it with his bonus. I looked at the driveway. My stomach dropped. The concrete slab where my SUV should have been parked was empty. Brenda had supposedly borrowed the car for a client meeting 4 weeks ago, but the agreement was that she returned it every evening. That had stopped happening 2 weeks ago. Now, looking at the empty space, the text about the lost key took on a sinister weight. They did not just have my car, they were careless with it. It's not there, I whispered. Dad pulled the truck up to the curb and put it in park. No, he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. I didn't think it would be. As the engine of the truck died, the silence in the cab was broken by a sharp ping from my father's phone. A notification lit up the dark screen, casting a ghostly blue glow on his weathered face. It was the email from Vinny. Dad swiped the screen open, his eyes scanning the lines of text with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. His jaw tightened, the muscles bunching visibly beneath his skin. Without saying a word, he angled the phone toward me. "Read it," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Read the numbers." Harper. I took the phone, my hands trembling slightly. It was a summary report, dense with financial data, but the highlights were impossible to miss. My eyes widened as I read the first section. Gavin, my husband, the man who put on a suit every morning and left the house at 8 o'clock sharp for his job as a strategic director, had not been employed for 6 months. The report showed his severance package from his last firm had run dry 4 months ago. He has been unemployed for half a year, Dad said, cutting through my confusion. He leaves the house to go gamble online at a coffee shop. Look at the debt column. I looked. My stomach lurched violently. There was a negative balance across 3 credit cards totaling $42,000, plus another $38,000 owed to a digital sports betting platform. He is drowning, Dad continued ruthlessly. But keep reading. It gets worse. I scrolled down to the section on Brenda and Kelly. The company, Elite Visions, was flagged in a state fraud database. They were under investigation for operating a modified pyramid scheme, taking deposits for events that never happened and using new client money to pay off old debts. But the final paragraph was the one that made the bile rise in my throat. Vinny had flagged a query on the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. Subject vehicle SUV. VIN match detected. Status pending lien application via non-traditional lender. Do you see that, Dad asked, pointing a thick finger at the screen. They are not just driving your car, Harper. They are trying to leverage it. They are in the process of using your $90,000 vehicle as collateral for a high-interest, black market loan. They need the physical car and the key to finalize the inspection for the lender. That is why they need the spare key tonight. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I felt nauseous. The love, the marriage, the family dinners, it was all a lie. I was not a wife or a sister-in-law to them. I was an ATM. I was a human shield they were using to protect themselves from their own incompetence and greed. I handed the phone back to Dad, feeling a cold numbness spread through my limbs. The tears were gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. They were going to sell my car out from under me, I whispered. They were going to try, Dad corrected. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip grounding me. Now listen to me carefully. I am going to stay right here in the truck. You go inside. Do not scream. Do not cry. Just pack your bags and get Mia's things. If anyone touches you or if things go sideways, I will come through that front door, and I won't be coming as a guest. Do you understand? I nodded. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old coffee and safety one last time, and opened the door. Stepping onto the pavement felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I walked up the driveway, past the empty spot where my car should have been, and inserted my key into the lock. I turned it with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. I pushed the door open. The contrast between the chaos of my life and the scene inside was jarring. The living room was a wreck. takeout containers littered the coffee table, and the air smelled of stale pepperoni and cheap lager. Gavin was sprawled on the couch, illuminated by the flickering light of the television, nursing a beer. He looked completely unbothered, a man relaxing in his castle while his kingdom burned down around him. He didn't even turn his head as I walked in, just took another sip of his drink, completely unaware that his entire world had just ended. He did not ask why I was home late, or why our daughter looked like she had been dragged through a war zone. He simply jerked his chin toward me, his eyes glassy and impatient. "You are late," he grumbled, the words slurring slightly. "Where is the spare key Brenda has been waiting for an hour?" I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. I did not answer him. I walked past the living room, gripping Mia's hand tightly, and headed straight for the stairs. My silence seemed to confuse him for a second, but then I heard the heavy thud of his beer bottle hitting the coffee table. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice rising. "I am talking to you!" I ignored him, marching up the steps. I ushered Mia into her bedroom and sat her down on her bed, handing her a stuffed bear. "Stay here, baby," I whispered. "Mommy just needs to get some clothes." I went into the master bedroom and dragged my suitcase out of the closet. I threw it onto the bed and started pulling drawers open, grabbing handfuls of clothes without folding them. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs behind me. Gavin burst into the room, his face flushed with irritation. He saw the open suitcase and rushed forward, grabbing the handle and yanking it away from me. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded, looming over me. "You act like a ghost all evening, and now this." "Put the clothes back. Harper." "You are being hysterical." I stopped moving. I took a slow breath and looked him directly in the eyes. For the first time in years, the fear that usually knotted my stomach was gone. In its place was nothing but disgust. "I am going to my father's house," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And I know you are unemployed, Gavin." The air left the room. Gavin froze, his mouth hanging slightly open. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. For a heartbeat, he looked like a frightened child caught stealing candy. But then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into defensive rage. You have been spying on me," he spat, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "That is a violation of my privacy. You have no right to look at my financial records. I am the head of this household. You are a liar," I replied calmly. He snarled and reached out, his fingers hooking like claws, aiming for my wrist. "You listen to me," he began. Suddenly, a thunderous pounding echoed from the front door downstairs. It was not a polite knock. It was a demand for entry that shook the frame of the house. The doorbell rang continuously, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the tension. Before I could react, the door to the guest bedroom across the hall flew open. Brenda and Kelly stumbled out, wearing silk robes and face masks, looking annoyed. My jaw dropped. They had been living in my house. In the guest room I kept clean for visitors, and I had no idea. "God!" Harper Brenda shrieked, pulling her robe tighter. "Can you keep it down? We are trying to relax. You are making such a scene over nothing." "Yeah, seriously," Kelly added, rolling her eyes. "Stop being such a drama queen." "It is embarrassing." Gavin seemed to regain his confidence now that he had an audience. He stepped back into the doorway, blocking my exit with his body. He crossed his arms, a smug look returning to his face. "You are not going anywhere," he declared, staring down at me. "Not until you give me that spare key. Brenda needs it. Now." I looked at the three of them. My husband and his sister standing there in the home I paid for, demanding the last thing of value I owned. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. "You need the key?" I asked, tilting my head. So you can pawn it to the loan sharks." The silence that followed was absolute. Gavin flinched as if I had slapped him. Brenda's mouth snapped shut, and Kelly looked at the floor. The smugness evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization that I knew exactly what kind of monster they were hiding in the dark. Panic makes people do stupid things, and Gavin was panicked. The realization that I knew about the loan sharks and the gambling debt stripped away his last layer of civilized pretense. He did not step back. He lunged. His eyes were wild as he reached for the strap of my purse, his fingers clawing at the leather where the spare key was hidden. "Give it to me," he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You are not ruining this for me." I braced myself, clutching Mia to my chest and turning my back to him to shield her. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the yank of the bag or a shove. But it never happened. Downstairs, the front door, which I had deliberately left unlocked, flew open with a force that rattled the pictures on the hallway walls. Heavy, deliberate footsteps thundered up the stairs. These were not the frantic steps of a desperate man like Gavin. They were the rhythmic, heavy strikes of work boots that had walked on construction sites for 40 years. Gavin froze, his hand inches from my shoulder. He looked toward the bedroom door just as my father filled the frame. Dad did not look like a guest. He looked like a force of nature. He was flanked by two men in sharp, expensive charcoal suits and a uniformed police officer who looked like he had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. The sudden influx of people made the master bedroom feel incredibly small. The air grew heavy with the scent of drywall dust and aggressive legal cologne. Gavin scrambled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. He held his hands up in a pathetic surrender, his face transforming instantly from rage to a sickly, ingratiating smile. "Father-in-law," Gavin stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't know you were coming over. Look, this is just a private disagreement between husband and wife. You know how it is." Right? Dad did not even blink. He did not look at Gavin. He did not look at Brenda or Kelly, who were huddled together by the dresser looking like deer caught in headlights. He walked straight past them, stopping 2 feet in front of me. He looked at the fear in my eyes and the way Mia was trembling in my arms. "Are you and the baby okay?" he asked, his voice low and rumbling. I nodded, unable to find my voice, and buried my face in Mia's hair, behind Dad. The police officer stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his belt. His badge read, "Miller." "Ma'am, I am Officer Miller," he said calmly. "We received a request for a civil standby to ensure your safety while you retrieve your personal property. You are free to pack whatever you need." Brenda found her voice then. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at the officer. "This is insane!" she shrieked. "You cannot just barge in here. This is my brother's house. You have no right to be here." "Get out!" One of the men in suits stepped forward. He was older, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose. He opened a leather briefcase with a crisp snap. This was Mr. Sterling, the toughest litigator in the county. "Actually, Ms. Brenda," Sterling said, his tone polite but sharp as a razor. "According to the deed recorded with the county clerk, this property is held in joint tenancy. My client, Harper, owns 50% of this home and has every right to invite guests inside. But that is a minor detail." He pulled a thick file from his briefcase and held it up. "We are actually here to discuss the vehicle." Sterling continued. "Specifically, the black SUV registered to Harper Thomas." Dad nodded once at Sterling. It was the signal to drop the hammer. Sterling opened the file and began to read, his voice devoid of emotion. "At 9 o'clock this morning, a vehicle matching the VIN of my client's car was driven into Quick Cash Auto Pawn in Newark, New Jersey. We have the surveillance footage from the pawn shop owner, who was very cooperative once we informed him the car was technically stolen property." He pulled out a glossy photograph and held it up for the room to see. It was a grainy but undeniable image of Brenda standing at a counter, handing over a set of keys to a man with tattoos on his neck. "You pawned my car," I whispered, the horror of it finally settling in my bones. "It was a loan," Brenda yelled, her face turning blotchy red. "We were going to get it back next week when the client check cleared, with a fake title." Sterling corrected her, pulling out another document, "and a forged signature authorization. That changes this from a civil dispute to grand larceny and fraud." The room went dead silent. Gavin looked at Brenda, then at the photo, and I saw the moment his soul left his body. There was no talking his way out of this one. Mr. Sterling reached back into his leather briefcase, his movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. He produced a second photograph, larger than the first, and slid it across the dresser top so it sat right in front of Gavin. The first photo was just the arrival. Sterling said smoothly, "This one, however, is from the transaction counter. As you can see, it is not just Ms. Brenda in the frame. That is you, Mr. Gavin, signing the intake form next to her." The photo was high resolution enough to see the sweat stains on Gavin's shirt and the desperate look on his face as he handed over the keys. Brenda's face drained of all color, turning a pasty white that clashed horribly with her expensive face mask. She stammered, her hands fluttering nervously in the air. This is a huge misunderstanding," she cried out, her voice shrill. We were getting an appraisal." "Yes, that is it. We wanted to know the value of the asset for insurance purposes. We never intended to sell it." My father took a step forward. He did not yell. He did not need to. His voice was a low rumble of absolute authority that silenced Brenda instantly. "Save the stories," Dad said. "We have the paperwork from the pawn shop, but that is the least of your problems. The real issue is the title transfer document." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it up. "This is the authorization form required to pawn a vehicle not present in the owner's name." Dad continued, his eyes locking onto the middle sister. "It has a signature at the bottom that reads, Harper Thomas. But my daughter did not sign this." "You did. Kelly." I sent a scan of this document to a forensic handwriting expert an hour ago. He confirmed it is a crude forgery match to your handwriting samples from a birthday card you sent Harper last year. Kelly let out a choked gasp. She looked from Dad to the police officer, her eyes wide with panic. She took a slow step backward, inching toward the hallway, clearly thinking she could slip past them and make a run for it. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am," Officer Miller said, shifting his weight to block the doorway completely. "Flight risk just adds to the charges." Kelly froze, trapping herself against the wall, trembling like a leaf. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Gavin. His legs seemed to give out beneath him, and he slumped against the bed frame, sliding down until he was on the floor. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. His hands clasped together in a begging motion. "Harper, baby, please," he sobbed, his voice thick with snot and desperation. "We were just borrowing it. It was just to rotate some capital. We were going to buy it back next week. I swear you can't let them take me. Don't let me go to jail. Harper, please. I'm your husband." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. This was the man who had promised to protect me. This was the man who had stood by while his family called me uncultured and low class. I remembered the sneers at family dinners, the comments about my father's blue-collar job, the way they laughed at my cheap taste in clothes. Yet here they were, thieves in silk robes, living like parasites off the very people they mocked. "You are pathetic," I said, my voice cold. "It is not just the car." "Harper," Dad interrupted, delivering the final blow. "We checked the joint savings account, the one with the $50,000 you have been saving for Mia's college fund." My head snapped toward Dad. I felt the blood drain from my face. "It is gone," Dad said, staring at Gavin with pure hatred. "Empty." Gavin transferred the entire balance 3 days ago to a cryptocurrency exchange. It is theft of marital assets. The room exploded into chaos. The united front of the siblings shattered instantly. "You stole the savings," Brenda shrieked, turning on her brother. "You told me you had the cash to cover the pawn ticket interest. You said you had it handled." "It was your idea to pawn the car," Gavin screamed back, pointing a shaking finger at Brenda. "You said Elite Visions needed the money or the loan sharks would break your legs. I did this for you. I didn't sign the paper." Kelly yelled, trying to push herself into the corner. "Gavin told me to sign it." "He said Harper said it was okay. He lied to me. It is his fault. They were like rats in a bucket, climbing over each other to escape the rising water." I watched them tear each other apart, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, resolving anger. The illusion of their superiority was gone, leaving only the ugly truth of their greed. The cacophony of accusations filling the master bedroom was giving me a headache. Gavin was blaming Kelly. Kelly was screeching at Brenda, and Brenda was trying to scream over both of them. It was a circus of cowards, and I was the ringmaster who had finally decided to shut down the show. I stood up slowly from the edge of the bed. I turned to my father, who was watching the scene with a look of stony contempt. "Dad," I said softly, "take Mia." He nodded, shifting his weight to cradle my daughter against his chest, shielding her ears from the ugliness of her father's family. With my arms free and my back straight, I walked over to where Gavin was kneeling on the carpet. He was a mess of snot and tears, rocking back and forth like a toddler who had broken a vase. I stood over him, my shadow falling across his face. He stopped his blubbering and looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "I am not going to sue you for criminal liability today," I said, enunciating every word with surgical precision, "on one condition." The room went instantly silent. The bickering stopped as if someone had cut the power cord. Brenda's mouth snapped shut. Kelly froze against the wall. Gavin scrambled up to his knees, clutching the hem of my jeans, looking at me with pathetic, desperate hope. "Anything," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Anything, Harper. Just name it." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely no pity. I only felt a cold, hard resolve. "You are going to sign divorce papers right now," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "You will sign over full physical and legal custody of Mia to me. And you, along with your sisters, will vacate this house within 24 hours. Gavin blinked, processing the words. I did not give him time to argue. "The house will be listed for sale immediately," I continued. "The proceeds will be split. Your half will go to pay off your debts and whatever you owe my father. The remainder is mine." "What?" Brenda shrieked, stepping forward aggressively, her face twisting in outrage. "You are kicking us out. Where are we supposed to go? You are going to put us on the street." "That is not my problem," I replied, not even looking at her. "This is inhumane," Brenda yelled, turning to the police officer. "She can't do this. We have rights. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the three siblings with a bored expression, as if he were dealing with unruly children rather than adults. "Actually," Sterling said, his voice cutting through Brenda's hysteria, "the alternative to this offer is that Officer Miller executes the arrest warrants we have prepared. Between the forgery, the grand larceny, and the wire fraud regarding the savings account, the state prosecutor would have a field day. We have enough hard evidence to put all three of you in a state penitentiary for at least 5 years. He paused, letting the weight of that number hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "So," Sterling concluded, pulling a sleek black pen from his jacket pocket and clicking it open, "you can either be homeless for a few days, or you can be inmates for half a decade. The choice is entirely yours." A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the room. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning unit. Gavin looked at his sisters, who were pale and trembling. Then he looked at Officer Miller, whose hand was resting casually near the handcuffs on his belt. The metallic glint of the cuffs seemed to hypnotize him. Gavin swallowed hard. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was a survivor, a cockroach who would do anything to save his own skin. He did not look at me. He did not look at his daughter sleeping in her grandfather's arms. He only saw his own freedom on the line. He reached out with a shaking hand and took the pen from Mr. Sterling. "Give me the papers," Gavin whispered. Sterling produced a crisp document from his folder and laid it on the top of the dresser. Gavin pulled himself up from the floor, his legs wobbling. He leaned over the dresser, his hand trembling so violently that the tip of the pen tapped a staccato rhythm against the paper. "I'm sorry," he muttered to no one in particular. Then he pressed the pen to the paper and signed his life away. The scratch of the pen on the paper echoed in the silence like a judge's gavel. Gavin dropped the pen, his shoulders slumping as if the ink itself weighed 50 pounds. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for some sign of forgiveness, but he found only a wall of ice. Mr. Sterling wasted no time. He snatched the documents from the dresser with the speed of a striking cobra, checking the signatures with a professional eye before sliding them securely into his briefcase. The sharp snap of the briefcase lock was the sound of a steel door slamming shut on my past, but Brenda, true to her nature, could not let it go. Even as the walls closed in on them, her greed remained the only constant thing in her life. She took a step forward, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between the lawyer and the police officer. "Wait, what about the car?" she asked, her voice trembling but eager. "I mean, the pawn shop gave us $15,000 cash. We don't have to give that back right this second, do we? Since you are taking the car back anyway." She was actually hoping to keep the proceeds of the crime. The audacity was breathtaking. My father let out a cold, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of mirth, terrifying in its finality. "You really are stupid, aren't you?" Dad asked, shaking his head. "I did not need your permission or your pawn ticket to get that car back. I sent a recovery agent with the New Jersey State Police to that chop shop an hour ago. They seized the vehicle as stolen property. It is currently strapped to a flatbed truck on the turnpike, heading to my personal garage where it will stay locked up until you are all long gone." Brenda's jaw dropped, her dreams of a final payday evaporating instantly. "And just to be clear," Mr. Sterling added, checking his watch, "the impound fees, the recovery agent's invoice, and the legal costs for the seizure, that totals about $4,000. That amount will be deducted directly from Mr. Gavin's remaining share of the house sale. You effectively paid for your own arrest warrant, which we are graciously holding in abeyance." Gavin let out a low moan and buried his face in his hands. I reached down and gripped the handle of my suitcase. The plastic felt cool and solid in my hand. I looked around the room one last time. I saw the bed where I had cried myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't good enough for them. I saw the closet full of clothes Brenda had called tacky. It was all just noise now. The house was not a home, it was a cage, and the door was finally open. I looked at Gavin. He was still on the floor, a pathetic figure in an expensive shirt he probably bought with my money. "Do not ever contact me," I said, my voice steady. "Do not call. Do not text. Do not try to come to Mia's school. If I see your face, or if I hear from any of you, the non-prosecution agreement is void, and I will personally drive the police to your new apartment to arrest you." I did not wait for an answer. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I walked past Kelly, who was sobbing into the curtains. I walked past Brenda, who was staring at the floor in shock. I walked out into the hallway, my boots thudding softly on the carpet. Behind me, the temporary truce broke. I heard Brenda scream at Gavin, blaming him for the debt. I heard Gavin screaming back. They were cannibalizing each other, just as I knew they would. Harper Gavin's voice tore through the air, desperate and broken. "Harper, please, don't leave me like this. Harper, I did not slow down." I did not look back. I descended the stairs, each step lighter than the last. Dad brought up the rear. He stopped at the threshold of the bedroom door. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. Dad was looking down at Gavin, his expression unreadable. "You said something earlier tonight," Dad said, his voice carrying clearly through the house so even I could hear it over Gavin's sobbing. "You said Harper wasn't cut from the same cloth as your family. You were right. She is not in your class. She is miles above you." Dad turned and walked away, leaving them to their ruin. Stepping out of that house felt like surfacing from deep underwater. The night air hit my face, cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp pavement and distant rain. It was the sweetest thing I had ever smelled because it was the scent of freedom. The heavy diesel rumble of my father's Ford F-250 waited for me at the curb, the engine idling with a steady, rhythmic chug that sounded like a heartbeat of steel and reliability. I climbed into the passenger seat, pulling Mia close to my chest. She was dead weight in my arms, deep in the heavy, trusting sleep of a child who knows she is safe. I settled back against the worn fabric of the seat, and for the first time in 6 months, the knot of anxiety in my stomach began to unravel. It was a physical sensation, like a tight corset being unlaced, allowing me to finally breathe. Dad climbed into the driver's side, the door closing with a solid thud that shut out the rest of the world. He did not say a word. He did not offer any empty platitudes or tell me that he told me so. He simply reached across the center console, his large hand resting on my shoulder for a brief moment. He gave a firm squeeze, a silent transfer of strength, and then put the truck into gear. We pulled away from the curb. I could not resist looking into the side mirror. The house, with its manicured lawn and its dark secrets, shrank rapidly in the reflection. I watched it until we turned the corner and it disappeared completely, swallowed by the night. I felt absolutely no regret, only a profound sense of release. The cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I looked over at Dad. His profile was illuminated by the passing streetlights, stoic and calm. He drove with the same steady competence he applied to everything in his life. "Dad." I broke the silence, my voice sounding small in the quiet cab. "You knew everything. But when did you figure it all out?" He kept his eyes on the road, navigating the truck onto the main avenue. A small, sad smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I knew the moment you started turning down the Sunday barbecues," he said softly. "You have never missed a family dinner in your life. Harper, not once. You are loyal to a fault. I know my daughter. You do not walk away from your family. Not unless someone is forcing you to choose between them and your sanity." I turned my head to look out the window, blinking back fresh tears. He had seen my pain even when I was trying so hard to hide it. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red. I took stock of my life in that moment. I was 30 years old. I had no husband. My luxury car was currently strapped to a flatbed truck somewhere on the New Jersey Turnpike. I was about to sell my home to pay off a gambler's debts. On paper, I had lost everything. But as the city skyline opened up before us, I realized I was richer than I had ever been. I had my dignity back. I had the truth. I had my daughter safe in my arms, and I had a father who would burn the world down just to make sure I was warm. My phone vibrated against my hip, startling me. I pulled it out, half expecting a desperate text from Gavin begging for another chance. But the screen was dark, save for a single notification from my banking app. I swiped it open, A transfer had just cleared from Thomas HVAC Holdings. It was for $50,000. The memo line contained just 2 words: restart. Love you. A sob caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I turned the phone off completely and dropped it into my purse. I did not need to check it again tonight. I closed my eyes, letting the vibration of the truck lull me into a peace I had not known was possible. Tomorrow would be hard. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, realtors, in the messy business of dismantling a life. But tonight, I was safe. Tonight, I was just a daughter going home. The Ford F-250 merged onto the highway, a fortress of iron and love, moving steadily and unshakably toward the future. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your country or city below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.